not just slavery, beyond that. We need to do these things.
I agree about what you said about history, but I think sometimes we can be trapped by that as well, because not only have we got to do all this building of identity and being connected to our past and who we are, we've got to have the skills to live in the world that we live in. We're not going anywhere. This is where we are going to be, not only here but all over the world. You know, everywhere I go where they say, oh, there aren't any black people there, it's funny, you know, I look around and there's more black people. So black people are all over the world, in a lot of times in minority, and people have to have the skills to live, to be able to earn a living, to educate their children, to do whatever it is necessary to survive, and not only to survive but to survive well. And education must be about that as well, as being sometimes a feeling of being trapped and thinking about all it is about your identity. It is that, but it's also how you live in the world that you're in, and really, and quite clearly at the moment, it's a whole global, electronic, whatever world that we have to be educating our children for. And we can't decide that we don't like that in a way. We have to equip them with the skills to communicate with everybody, to utilize and to make the technology, to be not just consumers of it, but be producers of it as well. So all these things are important, but I think sometimes we can get trapped by thinking only about identity. I'm saying that's important, but there are many other things, so that when a young person looks out into the world, if they know who they are, they then have to ask the question, well, how do I find a place for myself in this world, however it looks? And it doesn't mean that you have to decide that it all looks very nice. You decide that, you know, it's a terrible world, and you might have to find a place that fights against it, or you might find a place that adjusts to it. But you have to do those two things at the same time. So I think I'm cautious of anyone that actually says that this is the ultimate in terms of education, because I think education is much more than that.
I think what everybody's been saying is a vital piece of the jigsaw that slots into place. I don't think, like Kathy was saying earlier, I don't think it's just one thing like history, looking at history and thinking history is the answer to the problem that we're looking at. But it's things about even educating the people who are in the media, or circumstances of challenging things that we see which are not portraying black people in a positive light. I think very often as black people we tend to take a passive role in society. We may moan and groan in the background, but when it comes to putting pen to paper, we tend to be a bit more reluctant. And I think once you've found your identity, and once you know what your history is, and once you know where you're going, you need to, for the wider community, for the sake of the wider black community, to challenge, when you're in a position to challenge, any images which do not portray the correct picture of what black people feel they are, or where they feel they've come from, or where they feel they're going. And I think until we start taking those issues as well on board and acting on them, we're not going to get very far, because it's very well and it's very good, it's very vital to find out what your identity is, and history is part of knowing your identity and formulating your identity. But until you're able to move on from there and say, this is who I am, this is where I'm going, and this is what needs to be said about me by the wider public, we're not going to make much inroads, I feel, in what society views as being, taking into account that it is a predominantly white society that we live in.
If anybody had perceived that what I'm saying is something very narrow about knowledge of self, no, we're talking about a very broad spectrum. You know, Jesus said, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. See, truth doesn't put you in a trap. Truth frees. See, if you have children who are black, and their name is David Smith, Fred Wilkinson, see, there comes a point When you got to appreciate that when you see a Chinese man, you see the Chinese, they have no difficulty in teaching their children their culture, their history, their language. This is what empowers people. But you have a whole set of people who are called Smith, Jones, Robinson, Green, Brown. You go to China tomorrow as Mr. White, put a passport down and let that immigration official look up and see your black face, and he knows immediately, here's a person with no knowledge of self. Because that's not you. That is the name of your former slave master. But you will only be empowered if you have a comprehensive knowledge of yourself. While we are living in a system, having no notion, and we're basically living a life of guesswork. We're not too sure. We don't know whether we're Afro-Caribbean. We don't know whether we're Afro-British or Black British. And these are the kind of things that black people are still confused about. Because somebody else is defining our reality. Somebody else's system, educational system, is saying, well, if you will just go along this road, you will achieve according to academic studies, and as a result of that, you'll be able to leave there and go and get a job. Life is not about a job. Life is about something much bigger than a job, because many of our people have got jobs. But they're still suffering. Their children are still suffering. The children are still ending up walking up and down on the streets drinking special brew, not knowing who it was specially brewed for. Tenants, never going to be a landlord, and so on and so forth. This is the reality of what exists out there.
All right, Kathy, can I just say something about that? I mean, I think when you say this from a position of having been very thoughtful and in your own education, then we know where you are. But you get a 14-year-old on the street and you say to them, you must learn this. He said, oh, I'm not learning this. This is the white man stuff. I'm not learning this. From a position of complete ignorance, and therefore lose their chance of any opportunity to get to a position of thinking, having very thoughtful ideas about who they are, because they've lost some of those chances a long time ago. They lose those chances far too soon. And by the time that they actually have got to stop and think about how to get back on the road, they have gone down a very rocky path. And I think sometimes we forget that there's a point at which children might have been able to be led to a different choice earlier on before going down a rocky path where they have to be rescued. And my view is, how does the educational system actually say to children at that point, you don't have to make all these mistakes, you don't have to go down a rocky path, you can, with the help of teachers, with parents, mentors and whatever, begin to build your life from now. So those are the things, so that we don't have 20 years wasted before somebody then says, oh, I think I've gone down the wrong path. That's my mission, if you like. I don't usually talk in religious terms, but I think it's a bit catching. My mission is to actually say, how do we get those children to feel that there is a path that they can go down that is useful, is healthy, is life-enhancing, and at the same time discover who they are, understand history, and learn the skills of life. Those are the things that I would ask.
Where we're from, we don't subsist. We're not subsistent people. You put something in the ground, it will grow. We don't come from a background. Our history is not one of subsistency. It's one of flourishing. It's one of development, civilization, and building. We come somewhere to Europe where 4,000 years ago there was an ice age here. It's quite a different culture. It's the complete reverse, more than any other race or color of people on the earth. Okay, we are here in this environment. Already there's a problem, as anybody could see. You have people who live from a level of subsistency, who have to plan around 4 seasons. We, where we come from, are the complete opposite. We've come from heaven, if you like, to hell. Now, when we're here, what are we going to do about it? And half the problem is we've got broken down machines. People who don't remember that. People who have no knowledge of that. They have amnesia of this. Now, do we teach these people about history which they could never hope to build on because they are not inside of the cocoon in which that history was formed and which that history then circulates and continues? which they can draw from. They don't have that seed. The seed is only a past idea, which comes from a book or somewhere else. Or do we then look at the situation and say, okay, we are in a place that is like this. We have now created, it's like we've come in a spaceship from somewhere and we're here. We cannot go back. We cannot change anything. All we have to do in understanding ourselves is understand where we are now. And the most important thing as black people in this country, we have to get our motives right. What are our motives? Most people's motives here is get money and as much of it as possible and in yesterday. This is not a motive. This is not a motive for life. It's not a motive for living. It's not a motive for a regeneration of our genius, of our pride or anything else. But this is a motivation which most people have, especially the young in this country, because it's a system we live in. The system has taught them, and if you take a man out of his environment and put into another environment where he feels completely alienated, the effects of that environment are likely to affect him more than the actual people who are indigenous to that environment. So therefore, we have to address that situation. The motive in the young and in ourselves must be renewed so that our motives change to something which is constant, something which comes from, if you like, the soul, or something which comes from within us, because that's where we come from.
We're approaching rapidly with something like 18 months to the year 2000, a very serious time in the history of the world. And what you need to appreciate is that black people are in tremendous danger. See, this is, we can't be sitting here talking about theories. We've got to be looking at what is it that's going to cause us to survive and be successful into and beyond the 21st century. Because we are still the only people on this planet right now without a collective plan of our own. The Chinese are not being forced to integrate. They're Chinese and they're respected in Chinatown being Chinese with Cantonese written on the phone boxes. They accumulate their money, they send it back to China, they look after Chinese people. Asian people do for themselves. Everybody's looking after themselves. We're the only people, black and white, 100% diametrically opposed. But we are constantly being fed this notion that, oh well, forget color, forget about who you are, assimilate, and in fact you got Caucasian people who come up to you now and tell you, oh, in fact when I see you I don't see a color. And some of us fall for this. Now when I look in the mirror, I see a black man. And I'm not afraid of what I see. I love what I see, and we have to teach our people to love self. Because the point is this, brother, you know, at the time of the breakout of the Second World War and the build-up to that, the Jewish people in Germany were the best read. They had economic power. They had a lot of influence in the society. In fact, that was one of the gripes of Hitler, that they had too much influence, too much power. But 6 million of them went into the gas chambers. Here you have a whole population of people who have no power whatsoever. And yet we're relaxing and getting so complacent when Europe is coming together. You have all of these fascist groups and organizations come. Racism is not getting less. You have, they say we are 1.5% of the population. We are 45% in the prisons. Over 60% in the mental institutions. And it's getting worse. More and more of our children are being eliminated from any kind of process of education. And so what that's telling me is that it's about time that those of us who think we know better start to do better and try to help our people en masse to get up and recognize that there is a problem and that we've got to do something for ourselves and start to build those institutions, those structures that's going to empower black children and empower black people to survive. Because if we continue the way we're going, then we haven't got too much in the future.